You know, it's always fun to glimpse inside another culture. It's the main reason I watch foreign movies, to see their fears and what makes other cultures scared. So, if for no other reason, it's a great reason to check out the cult movie, At Midnight, I'll Take Your Soul. It's a Brazilian movie from the 60s, and it's as bad as some of the horror movies made here in the 60s. The movie revolves around a small town and its weird local mortician. Now, ordinarily, when we're talking about a weird mortician, I'm right there with you. But this guy really isn't that scary. Maybe it's the fact that he's running roughshod over the whole town and he's the smallest dude in it. Or that he regularly backs down a whole bar full of men, even though they outnumber him like 6-1 and they're all bigger than he is. Or maybe it's just the fact that anyone in a dickie, a cape, and a top hat really isn't that scary to start with. Although we are led to believe that they're all afraid of him because he's evil and they're all God-fearing men. Anyway, our hero, whose nom de plume happens to be Coffin Joe, an apt name for the town mortician, don't you think? Well, he doesn't believe in anything except himself. In the first few minutes of the movie, we see him eating meat on Holy Friday, in spite of the fact that his wife and others are telling him that he can't. The horror! Alright, so if that's not enough, our buddy Coffin Joe is obsessed with his own bloodline. That's right, he must have a son to continue his bloodline. But sadly, his wife is unable to have children. Now, fortunately, Joe's buddy Antonio has an attractive woman who seems to be perfectly able to have kids. So Joe sets his evil plan into motion. First, he kills his wife by drugging her and putting a spider on her. Your classic 60s death. After the doctor says she's dead from the spider bite, Joe begins planning the funeral. And this seems to be a very cost-effective way of running a funeral business. You can increase your revenue anytime by simply adding clientele, as it were. Think about it. You never have a down season. You can get as much business as you want whenever you want it, just by drugging people and putting spiders on them. And anyway, back to the story. With his wife dead, Joe sets his sights on his friend Antonio, who's the only person in town who will talk to Joe, frankly. And Antonio stands between Joe and Teresa, Antonio's fiance. So Joe drowns his friend in a bathtub and buries him, then begins courting Teresa. Well, as you might imagine, it's kind of hard to like Joe at all, let alone find him attractive enough to have children with. So Joe rapes Teresa, in order to sire an heir, you understand. It's all business. Well, Teresa tells Joe she'll kill herself before she has any children for him. But before she does, she curses him. She and Antonio will return from the dead to carry Joe's soul off to hell before they'll ever rest in peace. Now Joe laughs and mocks her faith. Well, one thing leads to another. Joe is out walking after dark on the Day of the Dead, not a really smart thing to do by one who's been recently cursed. And in the end, Joe is accosted by the procession of the dead and driven to the tomb of Antonio and Teresa, where they, even though they look pretty dead, manage to kill Joe. The townspeople arrive in time to hear the screams, only to find Joe dead in their crypt. The end. This is a very interesting movie in that Joe is apparently something of a horror legend in South America. He's the Freddy Krueger of his day. He even inspired 5 sequels to this movie. But At Midnight, I'll Take Your Soul is the first. It's also interesting that the monster of the piece isn't really anything other than a deranged mortician who mocks God and anyone who has faith. The only thing that makes him different from the other townspeople, besides the top hat and cape, is that the fingernails on his right hand are very long. Now, I'm not sure why his fingernails are very long. I'm assuming that it has something to do with not having faith in fingernail clippers. Or maybe the fact that the devil reviles a nail file. Not really sure about any of those, though. At Midnight, I'll Take Your Soul is really worth checking out, mostly because Coffin Joe has a huge following in other parts of the world. And the story is an interesting look into the culture of Brazil in the 60s. The special effects are about what you'd expect from any movie made in the 60s. But the story is very different from anything that would have been made in this country at the same time. I'm giving At Midnight, I'll Take Your Soul 3 out of 4 cigars. It's not for everyone, but if you don't mind a horror movie with subtitles, and it's really more about faith and God than about horror, then it's going to be worth your time. So until next time, remember that at midnight, I'll watch indie movies over at roguecinema.com, and around 11:30 p.m., I'll check out new horror DVD releases every Tuesday at fearzone.com. And let's all agree to meet back here in 1 week when I'll review my own movie. At midnight, I'll have a light snack, and I'll remind you that the best movies are bad movies.